Hey, what's going on, guys? Jake with Millionaire Mafia. Just driving around today, got a little bit of screen time ahead of me, doing some stuff out around town between my property and a few other people's properties. So I wanted to talk about a book that I just finished up reading by a guy named Garrett Gunderson. So Garrett Gunderson is pretty well known in the business world and in the financial space by some people, not necessarily to the level of like a Grant Cardone or Dave Ramsey or something like that, but he wrote this book called What Would the Rockefellers Do? And that one might not be as well known as, let's say, his other book, which is called Killing Sacred Cows. So that's the one actually I'm moving on to next, and that one is pretty good so far. But anyway, in What Would the Rockefellers Do? The reason I read that one, it was actually a referral from one of my partners, a recommendation from him after a discussion that we had specifically about this thing called the infinite banking concept, or becoming your own banker, or in this book he calls it cash flow banking. And I'm not here to talk about, we're not going to talk about that today. That's for a different time. That can actually be a pretty polarizing topic. I found that out the other day, and we'll discuss that at some other time. But it was, great conversations. I learned a lot. I hope other people learned a lot by the the conversations that happen. And at least we're able to make up their own mind, because at the end of the day, that's what you got to do, right? So anyway, this book, though, What Would the Rockefellers Do? Really, well, it does kind of talk about that banking concept and that that mindset. The big thing was, he started out the book by comparing two families. So he compared the Vanderbilts and the Rockefellers. So they both were prominent in about the same era, in the mid to late 1800s and then into the early 1900s. Both Cornelius Vanderbilt as well as John D. Rockefeller were two of, or may even be in today's dollars, the two richest people that have ever lived in the modern era. So obviously very, very well off, did very well for themselves. The Vanderbilts created their wealth through, the Scottish family created their wealth through shipping. They started out with, local stuff overseas in Europe, and then they moved into shipping, and then they moved in the form of, like, no kidding, ships, and then they moved into railroads and things like that. So obviously became very wealthy through that way, and partnerships and all that stuff. The Rockefellers started, John D. Rockefeller started oil, grew his wealth in oil. He had several other partnerships as well, but Standard Oil is his big one that he's kind of known for. And his thing was to, because back in the day, they used oil not just for lubrication and for, creating fuel, which they didn't really do that as much back then, but they used coal, but they also used it to light and heat houses, right? Like, no kidding, oil lamps and heaters and things like that. So it was important and to have it cheap and to have it at a affordable point for the common man to be able to buy it and use it to live, essentially, especially in colder climates. So anyway, that was his goal, and that's what he did, and that's where he became wealthy. That was the value that he created, and that was the value that the Vanderbilts created. So both very smart individuals, both very smart business minds, both provided a huge value and service to their customers as well as their countries, and both became very wealthy because of it. So he sets the tone with that, and then he talks about, okay, so now 150 years later, plus or minus, where are the Vanderbilts at and where are the Rockefellers at, right? So he talks first about the Vanderbilts. The Vanderbilts essentially have squandered their wealth, and it was less than 150 years, but since that time, since the patriarch of the family, Cornelius Vanderbilt, started the company, they're essentially broke. Now, I'm sure there's people that are relatives and heirs of the Vanderbilts that do have money and things like that. You know, Anderson Cooper is actually an example of somebody who's relatively successful or has become successful, but you know, he talks about it in the book, and he wasn't able to use his family name or his pull to get him where he had to actually fake his credentials to allow him to get into the game initially, right? So he basically had to, you know, lie, cheat, and steal in order to get it done. Whereas the Rockefellers are still one of the wealthiest families, you know, in the country. Now, obviously, there's way more wealthy individuals, but their family as a whole is one of the wealthiest to still exist in the country. And they've been senators and representatives and vice presidents and, you know, heads of school, governors, you know, very, very prominent, you know, individuals, business owners, things like that. So they've not only retained their wealth, but they've also retained their influence and their pull in the U.S. economy, and I would imagine also in the global economy to certain extents. Now, I don't claim to know their full story and their full lineage or on either side, so take that for what it's worth. But the point that he's trying to make is that what's the difference? How do these two great families start out the same spot essentially, as far as very, very wealthy and monetarily and in business sense, yet end up completely different ends of the spectrum as far as their heirs and the generational wealth. And so he goes on to explain that the Vanderbilts, right, they didn't teach how to maintain that money. They just passed the money on. And there's another great book, which I'll probably talk about in a later time, because it really influenced myself, is called The Millionaire Next Door. And the reason I bring that up is because in that book, he talks about, you know, what makes up the average millionaire and how most millionaires' heirs squander their wealth within 2, and most of the time, I think it's like 90% within 3 generations. So that's not very long. That's less than 100 years, and all that wealth they could have, you know, tens or hundreds of millions of dollars is gone, right? So kind of crazy. And so that's what the Vanderbilts did. They passed the money on, but they didn't pass what the Rockefellers did, which is the true wealth, which is the knowledge and the experience and the mindset of how to become wealthy onto their heirs. And the Rockefellers did that better than anybody. And they set up trusts, and they set up, you know, boards of directors for their family. They basically treated and continue to treat their family as a business, their family bank, and not as a place for you to be able to just go and live off of and be dependent on. You must be independent or self-reliant, and then you are able to, you know, borrow or use the family's assets or funds to further propagate and grow the family wealth. That's the only way you're getting it, and that is a really cool and very, very infrequently used concept today, and that's what I thought was really neat. So and that is actually what really kicked off me wanting to discuss, you know, this and create this channel, was because it can be done by anybody. Yeah, you might not create, you know, the value that a John D. Rockefeller or a Cornelius Vanderbilt did in the form of, you know, creating a massive oil company or having, you know, shipping, you know, like ships and railroads and things like that. But you don't have to in order to start the family, you know, your family, your generation, taking that one small step to financial success and financial independence from anybody else, to include the government, right? So that's what this is focused on, right? We want to create a system that you can use, that we can all use to pass on generational wealth, not only in material wealth, but also the knowledge and the experience that can only be passed on by you to your heirs, right? So that is the goal. That's what we're here to do. I just wanted to talk about that really quick. I'm pretty excited to read the subsequent books. I'm excited to get the next video in for you guys as far as kind of my beginnings and where I came from and how I got to where I'm at. And you'll probably be pretty surprised it's not really all that crazy. And I hope that my intent with this is that it shows you that it can be done, and I'm not anything special, right? But it did take some special planning and some, special, some special work and a lot of hard work to get it to that point. But it doesn't mean that it can't be done. So anyway, talking enough here. I'm coming up to one of my rentals. Going to throw a few bug bombs in there before we start rehab on it. And then I got a couple other properties to head to today. But it was great talking to you. I hope you enjoyed this video. Like, comment, share, and subscribe so we can move this into the purview of other people, so that we can have other people who get to join in this path, in this journey towards achieving financial wealth and independence, and then passing it on. So take care. Hope you have a great rest of your day. See ya.